So I got my black belt when I was 7, and like I said, not old by any means between rounds. And I was like, my stomach hurts so bad. And he was like, well, he's like, I can't do anything right now. Like, do you want to win or not? I've learned throughout the years that you'll never find out unless you try, and you really push those limits for sure.
Welcome, Skylar. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Well, first of all, I'm excited because massive congratulations. You just qualified for your second Olympic Games. How are you feeling?
I did. I'm super excited. Thank you. It's always an honor, obviously, to represent Canada at any stage, but especially the Olympic Games. And so to now be at my have qualified for my second Olympic Games is super exciting, especially because Tokyo, as we all know, was a little bit of a different Games experience. And so I'm super excited for Paris. I love Paris. And I just love all things Olympic. So I'm excited for sure.
I was on your Instagram yesterday and you have this clip of like baby Skylar and you're like 5 or 6 years old. And then of course you have the words over the video saying like, did we do it? Did we make it? And you're in your tiny little taekwondo outfit as a baby one. And then it fast forwards to you qualifying for the Olympics. And I got all of the feels watching it.
I know. I think, like I said, I've been a huge fan of the Olympics my entire life. And from such a young age, I remember telling my parents, both of them, that they wanted to go to the Olympics and win a gold medal for Canada. And so to have that opportunity to try and accomplish that goal for a second time is a blessing for sure.
So you just referenced the Tokyo 2020 Games. And obviously Tokyo was a COVID Games, which completely changed the dynamic of the Games. What are you most looking forward to in Paris?
I think just to feel that like energy from the city. I think I've seen athletes on like the French team who have already been attending events and things going on in Paris, and just seeing that and seeing the energy that's already there and seeing how it's going to heighten as we get closer and closer to Games. I think we just had the 100-day countdown, so I think we're at 98 as we record the podcast today, and so I think that's the biggest thing. I think even watching the Games as a young girl from the TV, you can see and you can feel that magic of an Olympic Games, and that's something that I always loved about it. And so to get to experience that in person, I think for the first time, because I'd say in Tokyo it was there a little bit. Obviously an Olympics is an Olympics, but I think it was kind of missing that little spark and that energy that you see or that I've grown up watching. So I think I'm most excited for that, and then having my family in the stands as well is a huge one for sure.
Yeah, I cannot wait for you to experience that. I feel like the spark and the magic, right? Like energy is so palpable, and everybody that's at the Olympics is just like happy to be cheering, and all the athletes have this energy that I feel like it just like fills up your soul bucket with all of that magic, and I can't wait for you to experience that.
Yeah, I'm super excited for sure.
Let's kick this off with your sport. Can you teach us about taekwondo? Like, how would you describe it to someone so that they can watch you in Paris and have an idea of what's going on?
Okay, so taekwondo, like traditionally, is a martial art, which is originated in Korea, and that's where my dad was born. But we can kind of get into that whole story later. But so it's originated as a martial art, and through the years, it's kind of developed into this sport, and now it's obviously been in the Olympics since the 2000 Sydney Games. And so basically, what the aspect that's in the Olympics is sparring. So that's where you're fighting an opponent. So it's one-on-one, you're in a ring, and basically you wear special socks that have like magnet sensors in them, and then you wear a chest protector and a helmet that have the sensors as well. And so when your sock hits the chest protector or the helmet with a certain amount of force or like passes the threshold, then you'll score a point. If that makes sense.
It doesn't. I had no idea. Like, I've watched taekwondo and I had no idea about this magnet situation.
Yeah, and so basically it's you against your opponent. There's 3 2-minute rounds, and it's a best of 3 situation. And so this is a new thing that they introduced actually right after Tokyo. And so if you win the first 2 rounds, the match is over. If it's 1-1, then you go into the 3rd round.
Oh, cool. And how did it switch from Tokyo? Like, was it just 3 rounds no matter what, or what's the difference now?
Yeah, so in Tokyo, it was you completed the 3 rounds and the points were cumulative throughout the rounds, whereas now the points reset at the end of every round. And so whatever the score is at the end of round 1, whoever wins, wins. And then the points reset back to 0-0 at the beginning of the second round. So yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about that change? Like, do you like this new change that's coming into place?
I do, for sure. I think it makes the game a lot more exciting, a lot more dynamic, because at the end of every round, like, you have to push that pace and you have to score those points. If you're ahead, you have to keep the lead. If you're down, you have to kind of try and catch up at the end of every single round. Whereas before, you could kind of be like, oh, they're up by like 5, but I'll catch up later, you know, and you can kind of like chill at the end of the round, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, first of all, nothing about your sport looks chill, but I can understand the perspective of what you're trying to.
I'll get the points later. Whereas now it's like I need them now and I need to finish this round on top. So that's a big change that was made to the sport right after Tokyo, like I said. But so essentially you can kick to the body and you can kick to the head. And there's 4 different weight divisions for females and 4 different for men in the Olympics. And so the threshold of how hard you have to hit the chest protector is based on what weight division you're in. So obviously I kick lighter than the men's heavyweight division. So
okay. When you talk threshold, like, I'm so curious right now. So like, to get a point, like if someone's kicking your body, so that when we're watching this, like, I guess this is probably really hard to describe, but like, how hard are you getting hit? Like, is it like a tap, or are you like, oof, yeah, okay, that's a point?
I think it can be both. I think sometimes you have to kind of play with the system, and we train with the system, and a lot of athletes do, just to make sure that you're kind of aware of how the scoring works. And just from experience and competing for years and years, we're kind of used to it now, obviously, but it's not always the most force. And so sometimes that's hard as viewers. When you're watching the sport, you see a huge kick, and it won't score. And sometimes to us, it doesn't quite make sense either, but that's just kind of the way that the system is. And sometimes it's your opponent's momentum. So if you kick you can kick light, and if your opponent is moving into you, then that's a greater force, essentially, just because of that momentum is coming into the kick. And so that'll score. And so, yeah.
Okay, well, this gets me, I'm so glad you explained this, because this gets me so much more excited to watch it.
So and to the head is just, it has to touch. And so you don't have to hit like with a certain amount of force. We are a full contact sport, so there is full knockouts in the sport, but to score a point to the head, it just has to make any contact. So even if the tip of your toe touches the head, it's a point.
Okay, this is so great to know. Now, you just mentioned about this, right? Full contact sport.
Yes.
And I think people view combat sports in general as obviously quite intense, but there are deep roots of respect in taekwondo, right? One example would be seeing with the bowing. Can you tell me a little bit more about that culture in your sport?
Yeah, there are, for sure. And like I said, I think that's part of why I love the sport so much. Like you said, combat sports are typically very intense, and it is an intense sport, but I like to think of it as like very pretty. I don't know if that's weird to say.
No, it is an art form.
Exactly. And so I've grown up, like I said, I've done taekwondo since I could walk, with my family. And so I've grown up really in the martial arts aspect of the sport. And like I said, it's deep roots in Korea, and that's where the sport was kind of founded and originated. And so with that comes the culture of not only taekwondo itself, but the Korean culture is very deeply ingrained in the sport and the martial art as well. And so that sense of discipline and respect and all those principles, confidence, and all those things are really deeply rooted in the sport and in the martial art itself. So it's cool to see those transition from the martial art and from the culture of Korea into the sport of taekwondo, and that discipline and that respect within athletes, within coaches, within the officials, kind of is there at all times. And you see that athletes, you're fighting in the ring. I don't know if you'd say, like, for some people, you're friends outside of it, but there's always that level of respect for one another, which I really appreciate about the sport, for sure.
And I think that's really important for people to know, right? That you don't get in there, and it's a mix for athletes, right? There's such a mindset component. I know when I was competing, like, there was girls I competed against that were my direct competition, but yet we were also friends outside of it, right? And we would lean on each other and try and make each other better. And it's like, you can enter is it called the ring? Is that, yes. Or what would it be called? Okay, you enter the ring. Yeah. And you probably have a bit of both. Of course, you're fiercely competitive and want to win and want to take them down. But simultaneously, you're like, I also respect this person as an athlete and what they bring to the table today.
No, for sure. And I think it's every time you step in that ring, it's who's going to be the best today, right? The winner is not always the winner. The person that wins isn't the same every single time, and you find that in every single sport. And I think growing up as an athlete, that's something that I've kind of had to learn. And it's like, some days you're going to win, some days you're going to lose, and it's who shows up on that day and who's the best that day. And, you know, respect to the people that do win that day. And you have to give that respect where it's due. And I think as a young athlete, you're like, no, like I want to be the best every single time. And that's definitely the case. Like I do want to be on the top of the podium every single time. But just appreciating what other athletes are able to do, I think has been an important part of, I think, just maturing in sport. I think all athletes kind of have to learn that at some point.
Yeah. And there's such an intense mindset component, like you said, to that, which going into that, you referenced after your Tokyo 2022 Olympic experience that you wanted to work on your mental game. Can you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think growing up so if we kind of get into the full story of sport, or my journey in this sport, I grew up in a family where my dad, like I said, he was born in Korea, and his family immigrated to Canada when he was 8 years old. Him, his two parents, and his three sisters. And they didn't really speak English, like they didn't know where they were going to live. My grandpa used to teach Hapkido, which is another Korean martial art that we teach here in Winnipeg as well. But he used to teach that to the U.S. military in Korea. Yeah, and so he had a bunch of friends from the U.S. military, and some of them lived in Seattle, and so he wanted to immigrate to the U.S. And they've been trying for a bunch of years, and finally they said, okay, you can go to Winnipeg. And so they looked at it on the map, and they're like, oh, that's close enough, like we'll find our way to the U.S. Like it's close.
Close to Seattle, Winnipeg. Yeah, just around the corner, honestly.
So anyways, they ended up in Winnipeg, and they ended up staying. But so then my dad, he was in school eventually he'd practiced taekwondo in Korea as well. And then he was in school to be a lawyer once he was in Canada. And his friends kept bothering him to teach him taekwondo. And my grandpa was like, okay, just get it out of your system, you know, like the stereotypical, like open up a taekwondo school. And so he did. And so it kind of took off from there, and he never looked back. And so when I was born into the taekwondo school. My mom started taking classes there, and that's how my parents met. And so they run the school together even to this day. And so I grew up on the mats. So I was there 24/7 training, and my whole family did it. So my cousins, my uncles, my aunts, my younger brothers, my grandparents, everyone was there all the time. And so that's kind of what we did together. I don't even know what the question is anymore.
That's okay. I love all of that history because we're gonna get into it, and I love
had to do with the question, but I'm not sure.
It's okay. It's okay. So coming back to it, because that was a great history around it. Mental game. Post 2022, you were like, or post Tokyo 2022, you said, I want to work on my mental game.
Yes, exactly.
Tell me more how you got there.
Okay, so going into this whole story, my dad is my coach, and he has been since I was little. And so a big thing for me is that connection with my dad in the ring. And so it's always been, my dad tells me what to do and I do it. And so he's kind of been the brains of the operation. And from a young age, him and my grandpa together, like this was kind of their plan for me in a sense, or this is what they tell me at least. But their plan for me was kind of to develop me physically. And physically, like I said, I've been doing this sport since probably before I could walk. And so I have the skills in taekwondo that are so ingrained in me. And physically, I was for a long, I mean, I still am probably physically very strong in the division, but physically I was superior kind of to everyone as I grew up in the age groups of fighting. And my dad kind of would just have that mental like, okay, do this, and I would execute because I could. And so for a long time, I didn't really have to develop that mental game because physically I was just stronger than my opponents. And so through the years, I've slowly been obviously developing it because I can't solely rely on my dad 100% of the time. But it's taken a while. And so I think after Tokyo, like I said, going into the games, I was physically like probably one of the best that I've been. I was strong, I was fast, I was ready to go. But I think the biggest thing you notice at the games is that mental side of things. And it is the strategy piece, which obviously had to be worked on, but also that mental piece of dealing with the pressure, dealing with the emotions of sport itself. And so I think that's something that I really learned in Tokyo is that physically you can be ready, but that doesn't matter if mentally you're not there. And I think it's a harsh thing to realize, obviously, on the biggest stage of the world, where you want to perform so badly, but also where that pressure is the highest, and where all eyes are on you at the Olympic Games. And so I think that was a big thing for me. And so really working on how to deal with that and how to show up as my best self, how to show up and focus solely on me and not the outside noise around me and all those other things, I think is huge.
Yeah. What did working on your mental game kind of look like over these last few years?
Yeah, I think realizing that I was doing this for myself, I think was a huge one. I think, like I said, I've had this dream, and you talked about that video clip of me saying that I wanted to go to the Olympics when I was like 6 years old. And it's because I just had this dream myself, right? And it was for me, and because I wanted to accomplish this, because I loved watching the Olympics and the feelings that I got watching the Olympics. Like I talked about, that energy and seeing other Canadians on top of the podium with the anthem playing. And that's a feeling that I think as athletes we chase. And the sole purpose is really for ourselves, I think, especially in a sport where it's not like you're getting the fame or the money or things like that. It's because this is what I want to do. And, it's a goal that I've had since I was, and a dream that I've had since I was a little girl. And so I think that's a big thing for me. And I think I won the Junior World Championships in 2016. And the World Taekwondo had put me as like the new face of Taekwondo. And she was going to beat all the girls at the top and all this stuff and this noise. And I think I held on to that for a really long time, trying to live up to that. And I kind of like fell under that pressure. But I think kind of putting all those things aside and, like I said, focusing on me, on my circle of people, on my family, has been huge. I've also been working with a mental performance coach, Dave Paskovich out of Calgary, who's been awesome in helping me on my journey. So there's a lot of things that kind of go into it, obviously. And I think as the mental game, it's something that you never really fully figure out, but it's something you have to continue to keep working on for sure.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's so important for people to realize that, of just how much competing, especially at the top level, is mental. So I think that's really important for people to hear. You mentioned your dad being your coach, right?
Yes.
And constantly having that back and forth. Now, here's what I'm curious about, because so I did luge. My parents had no idea about my sport or how it worked. Zero, absolutely zero. So they certainly could not coach me. They were simply there in, a supportive way. Absolutely. Now, your dad's your coach and has been since you grew up, but I'm really curious because I'm sure as you got older and more experienced and you became an expert in the sport yourself, that there would be occasions where maybe you guys had differing opinions. Like, how did you navigate that?
I don't think so. Well, obviously there are times where I have my opinions, but I think the dynamic we have, and like I said, the sport originates from Korea. My dad is Korean, and so the culture is very much like that. So it's kind of like you listen to what your parents say, you listen to your elders, you respect them, obviously. And there's a mutual respect, of course. But it's always been for us is that what my dad says, we do, in a sense. And he's the coach. And I trust, and I think that comes because I trust him as well. I trust him 100%. And I know that he is an expert in what he does. I do what I do. But I do what I do because he's supported me and taught me and all these things. So I think there's just that mutual respect between the two of us that allows it to work. I know for a lot of parents and their children, it's hard to find that balance as an athlete-coach relationship. I know there's been multiple parents or athletes who've come to me and be like, how do you do it? Because it's not working for us. But I think from a young age, I've just always trusted my dad and what he was kind of telling me to do, and trusted his expertise in the sport and the history that he has in the sport. And it's never really led me astray, and there's never given me any reasons not to trust it or not to continue to trust in the process that we built together. I think you see, though, as I've gotten older, that there is a little bit more back and forth between the two of us. So I do obviously share my opinions a lot more now that I'm an older, more mature athlete. I tell him how I'm feeling. kind of those kind of things, so he can adjust the plan accordingly. But at the end of the day, I think there has to be that mutual respect, but also be like, he's the coach, and I'm listening to what he's doing, because sometimes it's hard. I think as athletes, when you have a coach who's not your dad, it's like you listen to what your coach says, but then when it is your dad, sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, it's just dad and he's just talking nonsense. So I think you have to kind of have a little bit of that differentiation to be like, he knows what he's talking about and I'm going to do it because he's my coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So knowing that Taekwondo it's really part of your family's fabric, I'm
Yes.
curious, was it part of like every facet of your family life growing up? Like, were you training in the backyard and were you guys always talking about it? Or was there kind of boundaries with Taekwondo and leaving that at the dojang?
I mean, I think there was a mix of both. I think growing up, it wasn't obviously as intense as it is now, because we weren't at the same level, we weren't as old. So growing up, we did grow up in the martial arts aspect, and so we did grow up at the academy. We were there all the time because, like I said, my parents run the school. All our family was there all the time training. Everyone in my family has a black belt, so there's 16 black belts in my family, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yes.
But yeah, but so I think we just loved to be there because we were with all the people. Like, we were with our family all the time. I was with my cousins hanging out every single day. We were like kicking around and punching and just, doing it for fun. And then all my friends were there because I spent so much time there. A lot of the people that we grew up with and our closest friends were all from the academy. And so I think we would do so many things as like a family, but then also we would do so many things with the people that trained at our school, and so our fellow like classmates. So I think Taekwondo was a huge part of our life. I think it probably encompassed a lot of what we did, but it wasn't in a sense of like what we should do better in training and what we should like need to work on. It was always in a very positive, fun way of, we love to be here, we love all the people we're doing it with. And so it wasn't like we were like, my parents had us training in the backyard when we were little and being like more kicks, like more reps, like work on this, fix this. It was always just like fun for us. And so I think that was a huge thing, and why we kind of, both my brothers and I talk about it, but why we kind of fell in love with the sport and continue to love what we do. I think if it was very strict and super intense from the very beginning, I think we would have probably burnt out by now. But it was always fun. Obviously now there's a lot more of like, okay, like you have to be a lot more focused and a lot more like, okay, when you're training and this is what we're working on and things like that. But I think early on, until we were older, it was definitely just more focused on like enjoying what we were doing because we loved it and we happened to do well in it. And I think the interesting thing too is that I started in the martial art and my family grew up in the martial art. My dad, he did Taekwondo. He didn't compete super, he didn't really compete nationally or internationally in the sport. When he came to Canada, his sport was actually speed skating, which he competed in. Yeah, which is interesting. It's kind of funny. But he always did Taekwondo just as the martial art of it. And when we grew up, that's kind of how we started. And then we started doing like local tournaments with the club. We would take athletes to Minneapolis or Regina or wherever, and we would compete. And I think we started doing well. And then we were like, okay, let's compete like nationally. And then we started competing nationally. So I think, and then internationally, and then kind of we found ourselves at the Olympics. And so I think the interesting thing is that as I grew as an athlete and I was kind of going up these levels, my dad was also going up those levels too. He'd never coached anyone nationally before he coached me nationally. He'd never coached anyone internationally until I did. He'd never coached anyone at the Olympics until I did. And so I think we were kind of like gradually learning together and going through the whole process together. And it's interesting because I'm the oldest, and so we went through this process, and I obviously made the Olympics in Tokyo, and now seeing my brothers go through the same process, he gives them a lot more grace because I think he understands the process and the journey. And so when he's having a bad day in practice, he's like, oh, like this is good because like next week he'll, is when he's going to peak. He has to go down a little bit because he's like, that's what happened to Skylar. Whereas like when I was having a bad day in practice, it was like, Skylar, like, what are you doing? Like, there was a bit more stress behind it because he didn't know that peak was coming. So I think he learned a lot with me and we both learned a lot together. And now he kind of gets to implement that with my brothers a little more. So I'm like, you're welcome.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Classic eldest sibling. I'm also the oldest sibling. And I'm like, that's how it works, right? Your parents have these like crazy strict rules with you. And then the next sibling comes and they're like, it's not a big deal, actually. I think that's really cool from your story, though, because what I hear is that, and I think it's really important for people to hear, I think so many parents put their kids into sport, which, as we know, is important. And both of us can speak endlessly about the power of sport. But then they have them take it so seriously so soon. And what I heard from your story, right, is it was about the joy of moving your body. It was about having fun and enjoying it. And it was about community. And
Exactly.
that's what I pulled out from what you said is because of those three things, that's actually what allowed you to then have longevity in your sport, to then take it seriously, to then have a healthy relationship with your sport, because it was still about fun and community. I think that's really important for people to hear.
Exactly. No, and I think looking back, like I said, I was like, and then we ended up at the Olympics, and it somewhat feels like that, because it's like we just kept continuing to work through these different stages. And obviously it was stressful at times, very stressful during certain moments, and trying to excel in anything that you do there's going to be like bumps in the road, there's going to be stress, there's going to be pressure and all those different things. But I think when I look back at it, it's just very cool to see where it started and kind of how it's progressed from there, and how we ended up at the Olympics and where we are. And I think a big thing, like you said, is having that joy and having that community and all those things. And a big part of me working on my mental game after Tokyo, like we just talked about, was going back to those roots. It was finding joy in what I was doing. It was connecting with my community again. I think during COVID, obviously, a lot of people were disconnected from their communities. And so reconnecting with my community at the Academy, reconnecting with my community in Winnipeg, and just really finding the joy in competing again, which I think I'd lost for a little while, was huge for me, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so you touched on this really quickly, and I need to bring this back up again, because for context, your father, your grandfather are both Taekwondo masters. You have 16 family members that are black belts, including your two younger brothers, your mother, your father, your grandfather, your aunts, your uncles, and your cousins.
Yes.
And then I also read your grandmother says she doesn't need a black belt because everybody else can protect her. And first of all, your grandma's hilarious. That's so funny. And I just want to shout out to grandma. But I'd love for you to explain to me, because I read this and I'm trying to understand, like, people, I think, kind of know what you mean when you say you're a black belt. They have so much respect for that. What does it mean to be a black belt versus, you're competing on the World Grand Prix circuit? Like, at the level that you're at the Grand Prix at the Olympics, is everybody just a black belt at that phase? Is that like kind of baseline?
Yeah, so to compete as a senior internationally as well, so that includes the Olympics, the Grand Prix, all those kinds of things, you have to be a World Taekwondo certified black belt.
Okay.
Yes, and so
that's helpful.
Yes, but it's I think as you have to kind of differentiate between the martial arts of Taekwondo and then the sport of Taekwondo. And I think that was something that, as I started competing, was something that was hard for my dad and myself to kind of wrap our heads around, because we had grown up, and both of us at different times obviously had grown up so ingrained in that martial arts of Taekwondo. And so to switch over to the sport, like I talked about, the electronic scoring system, you have to hit your foot, the magnets on your foot, to the chest protector or the helmet, but it doesn't have to be a technically sound kick, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of athletes and like no shade at all, it's a sport, but there's a lot of athletes from other countries who come into the sport from other sports or other things. So they'll kind of scout gymnasts or kickboxers or, any scouting pool, kind of how other sports do that. And they'll bring them in and they see that they'd be fit for Taekwondo, and they kind of very quickly progress them in the sport, and they are a black belt, but not a traditional Taekwondo black belt, if that makes sense. They're a black belt in the sport.
Okay.
And so their Taekwondo might not be technically traditionally sound, but they do what they need to do in order to score, because it is a game and it is a sport, if that makes sense.
Okay. That does. I think that's really important. Thank you so much for explaining that.
Yeah.
So in 2023, just
Yes.
last year, you competed at the Pan Am Games in Santiago alongside both of your brothers and having your dad as your coach. Can you tell me what it was like to compete alongside your family in Santiago?
That was so special. First of all, being in Chile in Santiago, my mom was born in Chile as well, and she immigrated to Canada when she was young. And so to be there for the first time, my brothers and I had never been before, and to have our extended family from Chile, who we've never met before, come and support us at the event was so special on its own. But then to be there on our first games team with my brothers was incredible. And I think I'd experienced the Pan Am Games before, I'd experienced Olympics before. So it wasn't my first time, but to see them experience it for their first time was super cool. I think almost more special than when I was just going there myself. Yeah. And so to be there competing alongside each other, I think my brothers and I have a very we have a normal sibling relationship, but it's also abnormal because we spend like 24/7 together, which is a lot when we're all like in our 20s now. But it's super fun, and so the connection that we have with each other is so special, and the support that we give each other especially during competitions is a special dynamic for sure. And so to be there at the games with them, being able to cheer them on, being in the back rooms together, warm up areas together, was really cool for sure. And to win a gold medal for Canada, and then my brother to win a bronze, was so special for sure.
Yeah. So after, you competed, you won a gold medal, your brothers land on the podium, and then you and your brother visited a local taekwondo club. Can you tell me what that experience was like?
It was so much fun. I think, like you said, we can both speak so much to the power of sport. And that's something that I'm super passionate about for sure. And so to share, obviously, the sport that I love, taekwondo, with the school, they're all trained in taekwondo and they all knew what they were doing. But just to visit them and kind of share a little bit about our experience at the games, as well as just in sport in general, and kind of share some tips and tricks with them. They had some questions on like how to deal with pressure, how do you deal with dieting, because we're a weight-based sport. So different things like that was really cool to share with them, and just to see how much they love the sport. And like I said, a big thing for me this past year was finding that joy again, and to see how much they love the sport, how excited they were to be training, and for us to be there and sharing the sport with them was so special. So to go in and give back to the community like that in Chile was special for sure. It was super fun.
Yeah. Why is it important to you to spend time with these young athletes, right? I see you light up inside when you talk about it, and kind of these lessons that you're passing on.
I think like I said, I see the power of sport and how much it's affected me. Being a young girl, growing up in the sport of taekwondo as well as many other sports, but especially taekwondo, it just gave me so much confidence. I think that's a big thing that I gained from the sport, and that was very evident in my journey through the sport of taekwondo. I was very, very shy growing up, and I got my black belt when I was 7, so I wasn't old per se.
Yeah, no kidding. An understatement of the entire conversation, Skylar.
So, side story, my dad got his in Korea when he was 6 years old because he'd done it all his life as well. And so my dad was obviously the one who would let my brothers and I test for our black belt. Like he'd tell everyone at our school, like when they were ready to test for their black belt. And so he like made sure that my brothers and I didn't beat his score. Like we were all like, oh, he got his when he was 6. Like we're going to try and get it younger.
Okay.
But he never let us test. So we all got ours when we were 7.
Just at the wise old age of 7 years old.
Yeah. So he had to hold on to that, and he didn't want to let us beat his record. But anyways, so I got my black belt when I was 7, and like I said, not old by any means.
No.
But I feel like going through that process of training for my black belt and going through the process of achieving that black belt, it really transformed me as a person, which is funny to say because I was 7. But like if you talk to anyone, I was super shy. Like I wouldn't talk to many people. We always have these banquets after the black belt awards. Like after the black belt test, there's an award ceremony where they get presented with their belts. And there's like a dance floor, and I would never dance. Like I would always be like, no, like, oh, I'm good here. I'm good on the chair. But then that night that I caught my black belt, like I was in the middle of the dance floor, like raising the roof, like everything. So, and I think after that day, like everyone jokes about like that they couldn't get me to stop talking after that. So I think there was just like this transformation, and I saw it in myself and others saw it in me. And like I said, I was only 7, and obviously the confidence and everything kind of progressed from there. But I think just that alone and seeing other people go through that process of achieving their black belt, you see kind of how they develop their confidence, they develop their skills in life. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me, is that sport's given me that, and I can see it in other individuals. And so to kind of help bring that out of them and bring out that confidence and that all of those things is super special. And so that's why I love to kind of connect with young athletes for sure.
That was an amazing story. And also I love the image of like baby, wise, old 7-year-old Skylar just like getting her black belt and feeling so confident in you and your body and who you were. And all of a sudden it like let you come out of your shell. That is an amazing story, an amazing mental clip in my head. So thank you for that.
But I think that is like a metaphorically kind of, I mean, it is what happened. And it went through that process of achieving my black belt. But I think you see that with athletes in all of their sports. Like you see them progressively gain that confidence and gain that confidence within themselves in the sport and their skill in the sport and all those things. But also you see that translate into their everyday life. And I think that's one of the most cool things about sport and one of the things that I love the most. And yeah, so if I have the opportunity to kind of help someone find that confidence within themselves, I think that's one of the coolest things I can do for sure.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Let's talk siblings, because so I have a sister, and I feel like siblings on one hand will like tell you straight how it is, right? Like they will be ruthless with you. Like my sister, if I was like, what do you think of this outfit? She would fully be like, yeah, it's not for you. It's not great, right? Like a friend would never say that, versus a sibling can just be totally ruthless. However, on the other hand, they will have your back no matter what, right? So heading into Paris, your brother is actually going with you as your sparring partner. What does it mean to have your brother as your partner in Paris?
It's super special. He was actually my training partner in Tokyo as well. So he got to come to the games with us. But both my brothers, and like I said, we have a very special relationship. We're with each other 24/7 since we were born until now, basically, because we train together, we live together, we do everything together. Not always by choice, but it's just what has to happen. So it's super special, and to have him there, especially on the biggest stage of the world, with, like I said, all that pressure's on, all eyes are on you, to have someone comforting like that be by your side and helping you through all that. Obviously my dad's there as well, but I think there's a difference between like a parent and a sibling. You can probably speak to that as well. And so, like I said, he'll tell me like if I'm in the wrong, if I'm doing something, he'll call me out for everything and anything. But I know at the end of the day, he's always going to be there to support me, and he wishes nothing but the best for me, and I do the same for them. I think especially in Tokyo, after I'd competed, and obviously it wasn't the result that I'd wanted, and I was very disappointed. But you come off the stage, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, but as soon as you're done competing, you go through a mixed zone. And so whether you won or you lost, you got to go through the mixed zone. And I wasn't aware of this.
For perspective, the mixed zone is where there's just a lineup of media and journalists that you have to talk to.
Exactly. And so I wasn't aware of this before I went to the games either. And so I'd won my first match, and so I went through the mixed zone. But, you know, in the morning, there's not as many people there. They're like, oh, okay. And so then my second match, I lost. And so I was obviously devastated. My dream of winning a gold medal for Canada was over at that time. And so I had to go through the mixed zone like immediately after. And I was like, I'm not prepared for this. But my brother actually came and he stood with me and helped me through all the media. And so that was super special. And after he'll joke about it now if I talk about it. He's like, no, I wasn't there. But he was there for sure. So yeah.
Oh, that's so special. I feel like I'm tearing up just thinking about him having your back.
Yeah, but I think, like you said, siblings are there, and in training, you know, they'll kick me around, I'll kick them around, they'll trip me to the floor when I'm running, you know, like all the normal like brother things. But they'll always have my back for sure.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a question, because you talk so much about inspiring this next generation, right, and the power of sport and confidence. And there's another piece I want to ask you about, because I've definitely found that our society likes to put people in boxes, right? You're either this or you're that. And I know I definitely experienced it. And even when I was training, right? Like you're in sweatpants most of the time, just training. But then occasionally, right, I'd get all decked out for fancy events, and sometimes teammates or coaches would kind of have this like, who do you think you are type attitude, like you don't fit into that box. And now, as if a person can't be both. Now you are quite literally, from my perspective, so take the compliment, as a warrior fighter, but then you also show up on social media in your fabulous green pantsuit, showing off your fabulous fashion. And I really love that you're showing up as an example that you don't have to be just one thing. So what would you tell others that feel like they have to fit into one predefined box?
Yeah, I think it's just that you don't. It's like plain and simple, you don't. I think from a very young age, obviously I've loved sport. I've loved taekwondo. I'm, like you said, I'm in my training gear like 24/7, essentially, basically. But I also have always loved fashion. I think I love to express myself through fashion, and I think it gives me a lot of confidence. And I think it goes both ways. I think when you're dressed, when you feel good in what you're wearing, you get that confidence, but also you have to have the confidence to kind of wear those out of the box pieces as well. So I think there's kind of a play on that. But I love fashion. I think we don't have to define ourselves as an athlete, as someone who's an athlete and in sports clothing. And then there's other people who are into fashion. I think we can do it all, for sure. And I think that's something that I'd love to share, especially being in a sport like taekwondo. I think as combat sports, you're supposed to be like tough and, a little more masculine maybe, as a stereotype kind of. But I think for me, it's been, I think not super consciously, but I think subconsciously to kind of bring that fashion into things, to dress up when I can, because why not? Look good, feel good, perform well, is my new motto for sure.
I love that.
Super cool. I was actually at an event with Natalie Spooner, on the Canadian hockey team, Canadian women's hockey team, and we were talking about, because she always has to plan her outfits now for the new PWHL for the walkouts, right? Because they walk into the games and like they're cool outfits. And I was like, I want to do that. We don't get to do walkouts and I don't get to wear a cool outfit. So she's like, you have to start it in taekwondo. So I was like, maybe, we'll see.
Okay, I love it. So everyone, eyes on Skylar for her green pantsuit, her fashion moment as she's getting ready for competing. I love that.
The problem is that we have to show up to the venues usually at like 7 a.m. and like you go straight into matches. So I'm like, I don't know if I want to be, like full glam and like show up in a ball gown and then like, so I'm like, it might not be practical, but we'll see what I can do.
You're like, I like the energy around the suggestion. Well, exactly. Anybody listening, you heard it here first. Skylar on one hand can be a more stereotypical masculine combat sport, and you can be fierce and you can be confident. And then on the other hand, you can bring out that more stereotypical feminine side of yourself and the fashion. And what I heard from that is anybody listening is, don't put yourself in one box, no matter what anybody tells you. Be weird, fit into as many boxes as feels authentically right to you.
No, exactly, for sure.
So changing paces a little bit, you've talked on Instagram and social media about the reality of getting your period during competition. And I love that you're speaking up about this and sharing your authentic experience. Why is it important for you to speak up about this?
I think it wasn't something that I initially was super passionate to speak up about. But I was doing a campaign with Hilberg and Burke for International Women's Day. And they'd asked me if I'd feel comfortable or if I had any stories of me competing while on my period. And I was like, actually, I do. And they're like, are you comfortable sharing it? And I was like, of course. It's a normal thing that happens to all of us women, all of us girls, and especially all of us athletes who have to compete under circumstances that we really can't control. And so I kind of shared that story of when I won my first Grand Prix in China. And I, of course, got my period that day that I was competing in the middle of competition day. And I was like, oh, perfect. But I made the final and I was in the semifinal match and my cramps were super bad. And in the video, you can actually see me leaning towards my dad in between rounds. And I was like, my stomach hurts so bad. And he was like, he's like, I can't do anything right now. Like, do you want to win or not? And I'm like, I do. So he's like, then you got to go. And I'm like, okay. So I went back into the ring. I won the match. And you see me immediately after the match, like hunching over because my stomach just hurt so bad. And so we come out and I'm talking to my team doctor and she's she's like, okay, like we don't have much time. She's helping me, but super frantic because the volunteers that were trying to, you know, marshal us in for the final were like, you don't have time, like you can't go back up, you have to stay down here in the holding area. And she was like, no, like my team doctor, she's amazing, like she'll vouch for us for anything, she'll yell at anyone she has to like get us the best situation possible, which is exactly what you want. So she was like, no, like we're not listening to you. She's like, I don't know what you're saying, I have to go. So we get upstairs and she's like, put your legs up on the wall. She had like ice on my stomach, she was feeding me like medicine and crackers and everything, and they were yelling at us, they're like, you have to go, you have to go. And she was telling me the whole time, she was like, this is your superpower, like and so I was like, okay, I can do it. And so I had to go back down to the holding area, and I remember sitting there before the match, and I think it kind of was to my advantage, but like I couldn't even think about fighting in the final. Like I didn't even like process that I was going to fight in the final. Like the nerves, I don't think were really there, because I was just like, my stomach hurt so bad. And I was sitting in that chair, but I think with the adrenaline, obviously, I know as athletes, we've all experienced it. You know, when you have an injury or anything, as soon as the adrenaline hits, you're like, no, I'm good. So as soon as I walked out onto the field of play, I completely forgot about that and was fully focused on the match and ended up winning it. But for sure, that's something as athletes that we have to deal with, that usually isn't talked about too much, or nobody would really know, because it's not something that, you know, how would people know really what you're going through? But yeah, so funny story for sure.
Yeah, well, I think it's important for you to talk about it, because like anything, it just normalizes it, right? And it's one story that you're telling, but you really have no idea how much of an impact and a ripple effect it could be making on other athletes hearing you talk about it, that maybe allows them to bring it up, and kind of just taking away the stigma surrounding something that happens to all women. You're like, just because I'm competing doesn't make it any different. So thanks for sharing your story.
Of course.
Yeah. So finally, 2 questions left for you. Okay. For any girls or women who are interested in starting taekwondo, recreationally or competitively, what would you want to say to them?
I think that it's so much fun. I would encourage anyone who's interested in starting taekwondo to do it. There's so much fun. There's so many. The community of taekwondo is not super big, but it's super welcoming. Everyone's, like I said, those principles of discipline and respect and all those are weaved into the martial art itself, and so that makes for a very welcoming environment. It's super fun, it's super empowering, it gives you a lot of confidence. It's a great workout as well, which we all love. So yeah, I would encourage anyone to get into it if they're interested, for sure.
Okay, well, I'm going to take you up on it, and next time we're in the same city, I want you to teach me taekwondo. I'm ready.
Yes.
Okay. So you are one of the athletes that's featured in Team Canada's Brave is Unbeatable campaign heading into the Paris Olympics, which I watched a clip of the campaign for the first time today, and I got all of the feels. It's so amazing and incredible and emotional. What was your experience on set like? Like, bring us behind the scenes.
I know the campaign just came out today as we're recording this podcast, which is super exciting. The shoot day was super fun. I was actually in Montreal. My dad and I flew down. He got to come with me because they were like, I was like, I need a partner and someone to, I was like, I can't kick myself, you know? So
yeah, the air.
Around a little bit. It was funny. He actually pulled his back like a few days before, just like tweaked it. And so he was trying to hold, but he was, yeah. So anyways, we were trying not to beat him up too much, but it was super fun. And the whole Canadian, like the whole team at the COC is amazing and so much fun to work with. We had great photographers and directors and videographers there. And the whole project, anytime that I work with the COC is always super empowering and super fun and uplifting. And so the vibes are always great, for sure. But we had a lot of fun. We were at the INS in Montreal. We did some kicking, we did some photo shoots, we did all of it.
So on that Brave is Unbeatable campaign, I think that your journey of building on your family's legacy of showing up to the dojang day in and day out, even on the hardest days, sharing your story authentically and showing the next generation the power of sport is so brave to me. And I want you to know that you are bravely paving the road for so many other athletes. But what does being brave mean to you personally?
I think that's been a huge word for me. Like I said, I think since Paris, since Tokyo, but leading up to Paris, I think being brave to just put your whole self out there. I think in terms of sport specifically, every time I step on the mat, to give it my all. And to put everything I have out there. And like I said at the beginning, it's either going to be good enough that day and you're going to win, or it's not. But I think the regrets come when you don't give that little last ounce of everything you have, when you're holding a little bit back. And I think that's what can stop you from being successful, from greatness for sure. And so to me, like I said, being brave is just putting everything out there. And I think that applies to life as well. I think in whatever you're doing, to put it all out there and see what happens. I talked to some people the other day. I was speaking at an event, and we were talking about like how to do that. And I was like, I think you just have to do it and see what happens. I think you can be scared of failure, and you can be like, what happens if I don't make it, right? But I think I've learned throughout the years that you'll never find out unless you try, and you really push those limits for sure.
Feeling the fear and doing it anyways, and just giving it your all no matter what the result.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Skylar, thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me today. I know you're busy getting ready for Paris, and just know that I'm cheering you on, and everybody listening to this is cheering you on, and we really appreciated you sharing our story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.